The decline of the United States and the rise of China isn't a matter of political opinion.
Mm.
It's not about who sits in the Oval Office, and it's not just a string of bad luck or bad policy.
Okay.
According to the data we have in front of us today, it is a mathematical certainty. It is the result of a historical algorithm that has repeated itself for 500 years, and we are simply the latest variables in the code.
That is a heavy way to start a conversation. You're saying the chaos we see, the inflation, the political polarization, the global tension, it's all just what? A script.
It's a predictable script, a cycle, and that is the core argument of principles for dealing with the changing world order by Ray Dalio, which is the book we are decoding today on Nonfiction Insights.
I'm glad we're tackling this one. I mean, Ray Dalio isn't just a historian writing from an ivory tower.
Not at all.
He's the founder of Bridgewater, the world's largest hedge fund. He studies history not to get a PhD, but to bet billions of dollars on what happens next.
Right. He puts his money where his math is.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to strip away the complex macroeconomics. We're going to use the Feynman technique, simple mental models and analogies, to understand what Dalio calls the big cycle.
Okay.
Because if his model is right, the world is about to change in ways none of us have seen in our lifetimes, but that have happened many, many times in history.
I want to challenge this right out of the gate, though. Dalio talks about history as a perpetual motion machine.
He does.
But isn't history made by people? That's where I always get stuck with these, deterministic theories. Do we not have free will? Can't a great leader just step in and change the direction of the country?
The trillion-dollar question, and Dalio's answer is, well, effectively no.
Yeah.
He argues that leaders think they are making choices, but they are actually trapped by the mechanics of the cycle.
Trapped how?
They're reacting to forces bigger than themselves. Think of it like a game of Monopoly.
Okay, I'm familiar with the board.
In the early game of Monopoly, what happens? Everyone has a little cash, the board is wide open, you go around buying property.
Sure.
That's the rise phase. Everyone feels productive because there is growth to be had. But fast forward 3 or 4 hours, what does the board look like then?
Well, usually 1 or 2 people own all the hotels. Everyone else is broke, mortgaging their properties, or in debt to the winners.
Exactly. The wealth is concentrated. The players who are losing start getting angry. They can't pay the rent. The game stops being fun and starts being a grind for survival.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a game of Monopoly, when one person has all the money and everyone else is bankrupt, what do?
You flip the board, you put the money back in the box, shuffle the cards, and you start a new game.
That is the big cycle. Dalio says history is just the Monopoly board getting flipped over and over again. You cannot keep playing the same round once the wealth is that concentrated and the debt is that high. The game must reset.
And we're in the late game phase.
We are in the late game phase waiting for the board flip.
That is a vividly disturbing image. But let's look at the mechanics of why the board flips. It's not just because people are grumpy. Dalio breaks this big cycle down to 3 specific forces, right? The holy trinity that drives the machine.
Yes. If you understand these 3, you understand the whole book.
Hmm.
So force number 1 is the debt and currency cycle, or as I call it, the trap of easy money.
This is the idea that good money eventually turns into bad money.
Precisely. Every major empire starts with hard money, usually gold or silver. It's real. You can't just create it out of thin air.
Right.
But as the empire grows, it wants to spend more. It wants to fight wars. It wants to build nice things. And politicians want to get elected by promising free stuff. So eventually they run out of gold.
And when they run out of gold, they start printing paper promises. They detach the currency from the hard asset.
Right. And here is the analogy Dalio uses, which I think is just perfect. Printing money is like injecting steroids.
Steroids. Okay.
Think about the physiological response. When a government prints a bunch of money, like we saw in 2008, or even more aggressively in 2020, what's the immediate effect?
Everything goes up. The stock market booms. Housing prices soar. People's 401ks look amazing. It feels like growth.
Exactly. It feels great. It's a rush of energy. You feel stronger, faster, richer. That's the high of the stimulus. But that's the trap. It's performance enhancement, not actual muscle growth.
And like steroids, there's a biological cost if you stay on them too long.
The economy becomes chemically dependent on the printed money. Your vital organs, which in this case is the value of the currency itself, start to fail.
Mm-hmm.
You can't stop the injections without crashing the body, but if you keep injecting, you kill the patient. The dollar eventually becomes worthless paper because you printed too much of it.
And Dalio points out this has happened to every single reserve currency in history. There isn't a single fiat currency that has survived forever.
Zero. They all go to zero eventually. Which brings us to force number 2, the internal order cycle, or as I call it, the Civil War script.
This connects back to the monopoly analogy, when the players get angry because they're losing. But I have to push back here.
Go for it.
We've always had political arguments in this country. People hated each other in the 60s. People hated each other in the 1800s. Why is this specific moment different?
Dalio makes a very sharp distinction here between political disagreement and enmity. In the early stages of an empire, the economic pie is growing.
Okay.
So if we disagree, we can compromise because we're both getting richer. I could let you have a slice because I know I'm getting a bigger slice next year.
But in the late stage, when the debt is high and the growth slows down, the pie shrinks.
And when the pie shrinks, sharing becomes fighting. It becomes a zero-sum game. If I get a slice, you lose a slice. Suddenly, my neighbor isn't just someone with a different opinion. They are an existential threat to my livelihood. And Dalio points out that this is when you see the rise of populism.
Which we are seeing globally. It's the emergence of leaders who say, I will fight them for you.
Exactly. You get populists from the left saying the system is rigged by the rich, we need to redistribute the wealth, and you get populists from the right saying the system is losing our traditional values, we need to fight to protect what we have.
And both sides become more autocratic.
Neither side is willing to compromise. It creates a paralysis where the government can't actually solve problems because they're too busy trying to destroy the opposition.
Which is the perfect opening for force number 3.
The external order cycle. The rise of a rival.
This is the classic Thucydides trap, the inevitable conflict when a rising power threatens a ruling power, in this case, the U.S. and China.
Right. And for this, let's use the boxing match analogy.
Walk me through it.
Imagine the U.S. is the old heavyweight champion. He's been the champ for 75 years. He's incredibly skilled. He has the best gear, the best trainers. But he's gotten a little lazy.
Okay.
He's carrying a lot of weight. That's the debt. He hasn't been training as hard because he's been enjoying the fame and the luxury.
And he's fighting internal battles with his own management team?
Exactly. Meanwhile, look at the challenger. China is the hungry fighter coming up from the streets. They're lean. They're training 12 hours a day. They've been watching films of the old champions fights, learning every move, copying the techniques that worked, and discarding the ones that didn't.
And the belt they're fighting for is the status of the world reserve currency.
That is the prize. The reserve currency is the world's credit card. The U.S. has it. China wants it. History says when you have a declining empire fighting internally and a rising empire pushing externally, war, whether it's trade war, tech war, or shooting war, is almost guaranteed.
Okay, so we have the 3 forces, debt, internal conflict, external rivalry. But I have to ask the question that I think everyone listening is shouting at their device right now.
I think I know what it is.
If we know this, if we know printing money destroys the empire, why don't the politicians just stop printing it? Why don't they just fix the budget? Are they stupid?
It's not stupidity. It's a trap of human nature. Dalio explains this as the conflict between the short term and the long term.
The politician's dilemma.
Think about it. Imagine a president comes out today, doesn't matter which party, and says, my fellow Americans, to save the dollar for our grandchildren, we are going to stop printing money.
Right.
Interest rates will go to 15%, the stock market will likely crash, your home value will drop 40%, unemployment will spike, but in 20 years, our system will be healthy. What happens to that president?
He'd laughed out of office.
For impeach, there would be riots.
Exactly. Stopping the printing press causes immediate excruciating pain. It's the withdrawal from the steroids, the body crashes. But printing more money, that pushes the pain into the future. It buys you another year of feeling good. It keeps the voters happy for one more cycle.
So no politician, regardless of party, chooses immediate pain on their watch.
Never. They always choose to kick the can down the road. This is why Dalio calls it a deterministic machine. Human nature predictably avoids pain. So we predictably keep printing, and we predictably keep fighting until the system collapses under its own weight. We literally can't help ourselves. That is incredibly bleak. But I know Dalio isn't just theorizing here. He brought receipts. He tracked this over 500 years.
He did.
I want to dig into the historical proof, because I think we often feel like now is unique, but he shows it's really not.
He does. And this is where the book really shines. I want to walk through the proof stories he lays out, because once you see the pattern in the Dutch and British empires, You can't unsee it in America.
Let's start with the Dutch. I think people often forget the Netherlands was once the superpower of the world.
They were the absolute kings of the 1600s. They invented capitalism. They invented the stock market with the Dutch East India Company. Because they were the dominant trading power, the Dutch guilder was the world reserve currency. If you were a merchant in Shanghai or London, you wanted guilders, not pounds or francs.
It was good as gold.
It was better than gold. It was liquid. But then the cycle kicked in. They got rich. Their labor became expensive compared to their rivals. They got comfortable. And then they got into conflicts, specifically with the British.
Wars are expensive.
Incredibly expensive. To fund the Anglo-Dutch wars, they had to borrow. When they couldn't borrow enough, they started devaluing the guilder. They printed money to pay the soldiers.
And that's the tipping point.
That was the end. Once the world realized the guilder wasn't hard anymore, the trust evaporated. Capital fled Amsterdam and moved to London. The British pound took the crown. The Dutch Empire didn't disappear, but it became irrelevant on the global stage.
Reset. And then the British ran the same script.
Almost word for word. In the 1800s, the sun never set on the British Empire. The pound was the bedrock of the global financial system. But then came the 20th century. 2 massive world wars.
Which they won.
They won the wars, but they lost the empire. To fight Hitler, they had to borrow massive amounts of money and print pounds. They bankrupted themselves to survive. By the end of World War II, the U.S. had all the gold and the British had all the debt.
And the U.S. dollar took over.
But here is the specific moment Dalio highlights, which gave me chills. It wasn't immediate. The British struggled for years to keep the pound relevant. Finally, in 1967, the pressure was too much. The British government had to devalue the pound against the dollar. The Prime Minister went on TV and famously said, "This doesn't mean the pound in your pocket is worth less."
Which was a lie.
It was a total lie. Imports got more expensive. Savings got wiped out. It was the psychological end of the empire. And Dalio thinks we're approaching our 1967 moment.
Actually, reading the book, he suggests we might be even closer to the edge than that. He compares our current era directly to the 1930s.
The parallels are terrifyingly accurate. Just look at the timeline. 1929, a massive debt bubble bursts. 2008, a massive debt bubble bursts. What followed 1929? The government responded with massive money printing and zero interest rates to keep the economy alive. What followed 2008? The exact same thing, quantitative easing.
And in the 30s, that economic stress led to the rise of extreme populism.
Exactly. You had FDR changing the system from the left, redistribution of wealth. In Europe, you had Hitler and Mussolini rising on the right. We see the exact same archetype today, leaders who want to tear down the system to save the people. And back then, you had rising powers like Germany and Japan challenging the old order. Today, it's China.
When you line it up like that, 1929 equals 2008, it puts us right on the precipice of the conflict phase.
It does, and that brings us to the diagnosis. Dalio identifies exactly where the U.S. is right now in the big cycle. He calls it Stage 5.
And just to clarify, there are only 6 stages. Stage 6 is the collapse or the war.
Correct. Stage 5 is the decline. The indicators are blinking red. We have bad financial conditions. We are literally borrowing money just to pay the interest on our old debt. That is a death spiral.
Wow.
We have intense internal conflict, a sort of soft civil war where the two parties essentially want to destroy each other. And we have a peer rival in China.
It's hard to argue with those 3 points. But I think a lot of listeners, and honestly myself included, have this built-in defense mechanism. They think, yeah, but this is America. We're special. We always figure it out.
That is the American exceptionalism bug. Dalio addresses this head-on. He basically says the algorithm doesn't care about your feelings, your history, or your flag. It's physics. If you spend more than you earn and you hate your neighbor, you decline. Gravity applies to everyone.
You mentioned the internal conflict. There was a stat in the book about the wealth gap that really hammered this home for me. It wasn't just a vibe, it was a number.
Oh, the 0.1% stat, yeah. Dalio points out that right now, the top 0.1% of American households own roughly the same amount of wealth as the bottom 90% combined.
That is staggering.
It is. And the last time the wealth gap was that wide.
Let me guess. The 1930s.
The 1930s. It's the same script. When the gap gets that wide, the have-nots eventually refuse to play by the rules of the haves. They flip the board because the game is rigged against them.
So if we are in stage 5 and the board flip is coming, what does stage 6 look like? Dalio calls it the cleansing storm.
Yeah, stage 6 is the shift from peace and prosperity to conflict and restructuring. It's painful. It usually involves a massive default on debt.
Default meaning the government just says we aren't paying?
Usually not that explicit. It's usually a soft default. They print so much money that the debt gets paid back in dollars that are worth half as much. So the creditors get paid, but they get paid in monopoly money.
It wipes out savings.
It wipes out savings. And often, this stage involves a change in who runs the world.
It sounds like a disaster.
It is a disaster for the people living through it. But, and this is the hard part to swallow, Dalio argues it's necessary.
Necessary how?
It wipes out the bad debt. It breaks up the ossified structures that are holding back growth. It resets the system so a new cycle can begin. It's like a forest fire. It brings down the old dead wood so new trees can grow.
Okay, that's the macro view. But for the person listening to this, someone who has a savings account, maybe a 401k, a family, what do? If the storm is coming, do you just hide?
Dalio gives some practical strategies, but they go against conventional wisdom. The biggest one is about cash. We are taught that cash is safe. If the market gets scary, go to cash.
Right, cash is king.
Dalio says in stage 5, cash is trash.
Trash. That feels counterintuitive.
Think about the steroid analogy. If the government is injecting money into the system to keep it alive, the supply of dollars is exploding.
Okay.
That means the value of every individual dollar in your pocket is dropping. If you hold cash or bonds during the printing phase, you are guaranteed to lose purchasing power. You are holding a melting ice cube.
So where do you go if stocks are a bubble and cash is melting?
Real diversification. And he doesn't mean buy tech stocks and healthcare stocks. He means owning things that the government can't print.
Hard assets.
Gold, commodities, real estate, and different currencies. Don't have all your wealth in U.S. dollars or assets tied to the U.S. economy. He uses the shelter analogy. You cannot stop a hurricane. The big cycle is a hurricane. It's bigger than you, bigger than the president, bigger than the Fed. But you can board up your windows. You can reinforce your shelter. Financial preparation owning assets that do well when the dollar does poorly is how you board up the windows.
It's about recognizing that the normal we're used to, stocks always go up, the dollar is always strong, might be the abnormality. We might be reverting to a much harsher historical mean.
Exactly. We've lived in a lucky bubble of history since 1945. That bubble is leaking.
So let's try to synthesize this. We've covered a lot of heavy ground, from 17th century Dutch bankers to modern steroid-injected economies.
Yeah.
If you had to explain this entire book to a teenager, how would you sum it up?
I'd say this. Countries are just like people. They're born, they get strong, they get rich, then they get lazy and overconfident. They borrow way too much money to party and buy nice things. They start fighting with their family over the leftovers. And eventually they die or they go bankrupt and have to start over.
Okay.
America is currently the rich, old, quarreling guy who owes a lot of money and is wondering why his knees hurt.
That actually makes perfect sense. I can explain that to anyone. It removes the mystery of why is everything so crazy right now? It's just old age.
It's just old age. And that's the power of the system view. When you view history as an algorithm, it removes the shock. You stop looking at the news and thinking, I can't believe this is happening. You start thinking, yes. Stage 5, right on schedule.
It's a terrifying kind of comfort, but it is comfort. It turns the chaos into a map.
And here is a provocative thought to leave you with. We tend to view the decline of the U.S. empire as a tragedy. We mourn it. But if this cycle is biological, if it's evolutionary, isn't it actually a good thing?
How so? That feels like a hard sell.
Well, in nature, death is necessary for new life. A forest that never burns eventually dies anyway because the underbrush chokes out everything.
Yeah.
Is the cleansing storm simply the mechanism the world uses to evolve? Maybe the decline of the old order is the only way to make room for whatever or whoever comes next to build something better.
That is something I'm going to be thinking about for a long time. It shifts the perspective from failure to evolution.
If you want more deep dives like this, where we decode the scripts running our world, make sure to subscribe.
This has been Nonfiction Insights.
See you in the next cycle.